January 1945. A German artillery captain sat on the floor of a schoolhouse outside Liege, with his wrists raw from the march, frozen mud on his boots, and a bandage wrapped around one ear. He had been captured before dawn. He expected the guards to behave like soldiers in a war that was almost over, only for the dead. Hard faces, sharp orders, rifles held tight, a room that smelled like fear. Instead, an American private in a field jacket that still looked almost new stepped over a pile of sleeping bags and handed him a paper cup of hot coffee. Then the private looked at the captain's feet, frowned, and tossed him a pair of dry wool socks from an open crate. Not one pair counted out from a quartermaster. Not a favor that needed permission. Just a pair of socks, thrown across the room like they meant nothing. The captain stared at them longer than he stared at the guard. The guard's rifle was leaning against a school desk. His helmet was pushed back on his head. Two other GIs were arguing about baseball. Someone was heating a tin of stew over a little stove as if the front line were not close enough to hear. To the German officer, none of it looked military. It looked careless, soft, almost childish. And that was what made it terrifying. Because these men, these slouching, coffee-drinking, gum-chewing Americans, were not losing. They were advancing. The officer had spent his adult life inside an army that treated discipline like a religion. Every bootlace, every salute, every map symbol, every shouted order had meaning. He had been taught that war belonged to men who mastered hardship, men who could move hungry, sleep in ice, repair engines with wire, and turn a village cellar into a fortress before sunrise. Now he was watching an army that seemed to break every rule of what a serious army was supposed to look like, and still, somehow, it was crushing the Wehrmacht. That confusion did not belong to one prisoner in one schoolhouse. It appeared in German reports, interrogation notes, letters, and battlefield remarks from North Africa to Normandy to the Ardennes. The American soldier was called sloppy, too dependent on machines, poorly disciplined, too quick to stop, too slow to close, too casual with equipment, too generous with ammunition. And then, often in the same breath, he was described as something else, to exhaust. The shock was not that Americans were brave. German soldiers had seen bravery everywhere by 1944. It was not that Americans had numbers. Germany understood numbers. The real shock was that the United States Army, fought by a logic German training had never prepared them to respect. A logic that looked amateurish at 10 yards and unbeatable from 10 miles away. To understand why that was so disturbing, you have to start with the army doing the judging. The German officer corps did not see itself as merely professional. It saw itself as the inheritor of a military tradition older and sharper than the nations it fought. Prussian drill. Moltke's operational thinking. Clausewitz in the classroom. Years of hard campaigning in Poland, France, the Balkans, North Africa, and Russia. At the center of that world was Auftragstactik, mission-type tactics. It meant a commander did not need to tell every man every step. He gave the purpose, the objective, the result required. The officer or NCO on the ground was expected to read the terrain, seize the chance, and act without waiting for permission. Take the ridge, hold the bridge, cut the road, find your own way. It produced junior leaders who were aggressive, flexible, and tactically dangerous. A German sergeant who lost his lieutenant was expected to think like a lieutenant. A lieutenant who lost his captain was expected to act before the enemy realized the chain of command had been hit. That system helped create astonishing early victories. It also created a belief that the German soldier was not simply better trained. He was better at war. By the time American troops appeared in serious numbers, German veterans already had mental categories for their enemies. The British were stubborn, methodical, disciplined, and sometimes predictable. A hard enemy, but a familiar one. The Soviets were terrifying in a different way. They absorbed punishment on a scale that seemed impossible, then came forward again through snow, mud, smoke, and bodies. German soldiers feared the Red Army's mass, endurance, and revenge, but even that fit a category they understood. The Americans did not. Before contact, German assumptions were poisoned by propaganda and professional arrogance.
The United States was imagined as commercial, loud, rich, soft, and unserious. A nation of automobiles, movie stars, salesmen, and baseball crowds trying to improvise a real army in a hurry. German officers did not deny American factories. They saw the trucks, aircraft, fuel, radios, and ammunition. But many believed all of it was a crude substitute for military art. Steel in the hands of amateurs. So when American divisions landed in North Africa, and later when they pushed inland from Normandy, experienced German units expected a force that would be road-bound, nervous, wasteful, and brittle under pressure. They expected a country of shopkeepers to fight like shopkeepers. The first problem with that belief appeared in the hedgerows. Normandy was not open country. It was a maze of sunken lanes, thick earthen walls, orchards, stone farms, and fields boxed in by hedgerows that turned every few yards into a possible ambush. For German defenders, it was nearly perfect terrain. A machine gun behind a bank, a mortar hidden behind an orchard, a Panzerfaust in a barn doorway, a rifleman watching a lane no wider than a cart path. A German squad could vanish into that country and turn one field into a trap. One morning, near a narrow lane outside St. Lo, a German MG team watched an American patrol move into range. The Americans did not glide through the terrain like veterans of the Eastern Front. They were spread loosely, too visible, too talkative. One man was carrying his rifle like a farm tool. Another kept glancing back as if waiting for instructions. To the German gunner, it looked exactly like the weakness he had been promised. He let them come closer. Then he fired. The lane exploded with dirt and leaves. 2 Americans dropped. The rest hit the ground, scrambling behind shallow cover. The German sergeant expected the next phase by instinct. The Americans would try to rush, or they would attempt a clumsy flank through the hedge, or they would panic and expose themselves. Instead, they did something that felt almost insulting. They stopped. They stopped fighting for the lane at all. A few rifles cracked back. Then the Americans dragged their wounded behind the bank, disappeared, and went quiet. No heroic charge, no duel of small unit brilliance, no test of nerve between German maneuver and American courage. Just silence. The German sergeant had perhaps 2 minutes to enjoy it. Then the first shells came in. Not a few rounds to frighten him. A timed concentration. Shells walking across the field, breaking the hedgerow, smashing the trees, tearing the lane apart, turning a neat German firing position into a red-brown crater. For the survivors, the lesson was immediate. Their ambush had worked. Their fire discipline had worked. Their use of terrain had worked. And none of it mattered. Because the American answer to a tactical problem was not always a better tactic. Sometimes it was to remove the piece of ground where the problem stood. This happened again and again. A German platoon would defend a farmhouse with skill. The Americans would halt, find cover, call by radio, and the building would be hit by tank destroyers or divisional artillery.
A mortar team would delay a road. The Americans would stop the column, mark the grid, and the next sound would be shells, aircraft, or both. To German eyes, this looked like fear at first. American infantry seemed unwilling to close. They did not always press the attack with the romantic aggression German doctrine admired. They stopped too easily. They waited. They asked for fire support. They let machines do work that, in the German ideal, fighting men were supposed to do themselves. Early German reports used that as proof. The American soldier was soft. The American soldier lacked spirit. The American soldier depended on artillery because he was not a real close combat fighter. Then the reports began to change, because the Americans did not stop forever. They stopped long enough for the system behind them to find the target. Then the guns opened. Then the fighter bombers came down. Then the tanks put shells through walls. Then the infantry stood up and walked through what was left. German soldiers had a word for the American and British aircraft that hunted roads, columns, and gun positions from the sky. Jabos. For men trying to move in daylight, the word became a kind of curse. A German column could be perfectly arranged, tactically sound, properly dispersed, and still be turned into burning metal because a few aircraft appeared at the wrong hour over the wrong road. Movement itself became a risk. Smoke from one truck could bring more aircraft. One bridge jam could become a massacre. That was the part German officers struggled to accept. The Americans were not refusing combat. They were refusing the kind of combat Germany preferred. They would not always accept the duel. They would not always reward a clever ambush by sending men into it. They were willing to spend steel, fuel, explosives, and time to avoid spending infantrymen. That sounded wasteful to Germany, but it was not waste. It was a doctrine made possible by abundance. Armor made the contradiction even sharper. German tank crews and anti-tank gunners respected their own machines almost as if they were living things. A Panther, a Panzer IV, an assault gun, even an old captured vehicle, represented irreplaceable weight in a shrinking war. Crews repaired what they could, scavenged what they needed, and performed miracles with broken parts because there might not be another machine coming. A German mechanic could turn 3 wrecks into one working vehicle under a canvas cover by lantern light. That was pride. It was also desperation. Against that world came the Sherman. The M4 Sherman was not the monster German propaganda sometimes pretended it needed to defeat. German crews knew its weaknesses. They saw it burn. They learned where to shoot. They watched American armored columns make mistakes, crowd roads, expose flanks, and push forward with what looked like reckless confidence. A concealed anti-tank gun might knock out the lead Sherman and stop the road. A Panther might destroy 2 or 3 in a short exchange. A Panzerfaust team in a ruined doorway might turn one into smoke and fire at 20 yards. In the German tactical mind, that should have mattered. Each kill was supposed to slow the attack. Each wreck was supposed to create hesitation. Each lost tank was supposed to reduce the enemy's will to keep coming. But with the Americans, the arithmetic felt wrong. A Sherman burned on Monday. Another arrived on Tuesday. A crew was evacuated. A replacement crew appeared. A damaged tank was pulled aside, tagged, and sometimes abandoned with a casualness that infuriated German observers. A thrown track, a damaged transmission, an engine problem that a German crew would fight all night to repair under shell fire, might be treated by Americans as a reason to move the crew into another vehicle and keep the operation moving. German officers called it criminal waste. Then they realized the waste was selective. The Americans were not careless with everything. They were careless with machines because they were careful with time, and more careful still with trained men. That was the part the Wehrmacht had not built itself to understand. Germany tried to preserve equipment because equipment was scarce. The United States spent equipment because equipment could be replaced faster than momentum could be rebuilt, and faster than a dead crew could be trained. To a German officer, a tank was a precious weapon. To the American system, a tank was also a line item in a river of production. Shipping, maintenance, fuel, spare parts, crew rotation, and replacement. A Sherman was not just a tank.
It was proof that Detroit, rail yards, ports, cargo ships, depots, mechanics, truck drivers, radios, map grids, and clerks were all fighting the same battle. That was why German soldiers began to say, sometimes bitterly, that they were not fighting an army. They were fighting a factory. The darkest realization often came not in combat, but afterward, when German troops overran American positions or passed American supply dumps as prisoners. By late 1944, the average German infantryman in the West was exhausted in a way that does not show fully on a map. He was short of fuel, short of ammunition, short of winter clothing, short of hot food, short of sleep, short of news that was not a lie. He carried equipment that had been repaired too many times. He counted cartridges. He wore boots that leaked. He watched horses pull loads an army of engines could no longer move. He knew that a truck without fuel was just a shelter with wheels. Then, during the Ardennes fighting, German squads broke into American foxholes, command posts, and abandoned rear positions expecting to find the usual battlefield scraps. They found a different civilization. Cans of meat, coffee, chocolate, cigarettes, chewing gum, clean bandages, gasoline cans, dry socks, field jackets, blankets, portable stoves, stacks of ammunition. Medical supplies in quantities German field stations could barely imagine. In some captured positions, they found things that felt almost obscene. Typewriters, duplicating machines, fresh newspapers, mail sacks, holiday parcels, field kitchens that had served hot food within reach of artillery. For a hungry German soldier, a chocolate bar in an abandoned foxhole was not a luxury item. It was evidence. It proved that the man he had been ordered to kill belonged to a machine far larger than the battlefield. The American private might look sloppy, but behind him stood a supply system with enough confidence to send him cigarettes, coffee, spare socks, penicillin, blood plasma, and replacement boots while Germany struggled to move fuel to its own spearheads. That was the material battle, Materialschlacht. The term was not new to Germans. They had used it in the First World War. They understood battles of artillery, tonnage, attrition, and industrial weight. But the Americans gave the word a new meaning. Not just shells, everything. Food as a weapon, fuel as a weapon, dry clothing as a weapon, medicine as a weapon, truck tires as a weapon, road priority as a weapon, replacement engines as a weapon, the ability to keep ordinary men functioning as a weapon. One German prisoner, after seeing a roadside supply dump in France, explained it with brutal simplicity. "You piled up the supplies," he said, "and then you let them fall on us." He was closer to the truth than many generals. After Normandy, the Allied armies outran their ports and railheads. The front moved faster than the supply system wanted to move. That should have created a crippling pause. Instead, the Americans built a rolling artery across France, the Red Ball Express. At its height, nearly 6,000 trucks moved day and night,
hauling roughly 12,000 tons of supplies a day toward the front. By the time the operation ended, more than 400,000 tons had gone forward. 3 out of 4 drivers were Black American soldiers, serving in a segregated army that denied them equal treatment while relying on them to keep the war moving. That contradiction mattered. The men driving those trucks were not decoration in the story. They were part of the mechanism that made German plans fail. They drove blacked-out roads. They pushed through exhaustion, accidents, breakdowns, and enemy danger. They kept fuel, ammunition, rations, and parts moving when the front was consuming everything faster than ports could unload it.
German intelligence officers who saw early figures on American tonnage often suspected exaggeration. No army, they thought, could push that much material forward through a damaged war zone with that much consistency. But it was not fantasy. It was the American way of war showing its real face. And once a German commander accepted that, the old comfort disappeared. Because an army that does not have to spend its mental energy wondering whether fuel, food, ammunition, and evacuation will exist tomorrow can spend that energy on destroying the enemy. Methodically. Even the American lack of visible discipline began to look different under that light. German prisoners watched guards slouch. They heard privates talk back in ways that would have gotten a German conscript punished instantly. They saw officers who did not seem to demand enough ceremony. They saw men chew gum on duty, call sergeants by nicknames, and treat rank with a kind of informality that felt almost indecent. The first conclusion was contempt. The second was unease, because under the casual surface, the machinery worked. The radio worked. The kitchen worked. The ammunition dump worked. The hospital route worked. The replacement system worked. The mail arrived. The maps were updated. The artillery answered. The trucks came back. The German army looked disciplined on the outside while its arteries were being cut. The American army looked loose on the outside while its arteries stayed open. That difference reached into the body of the soldier himself. The Wehrmacht celebrated endurance. It had to. German soldiers were expected to tolerate hunger, cold, untreated wounds, bad supply, and impossible orders as proof of soldierly worth. The American system made a different calculation. An infantryman was not a heroic, disposable object. He was expensive. He was trained. He was politically visible back home. He was more useful alive than dead, more useful warm than frozen, more useful fed than starving, more useful evacuated and treated than left to rot behind a barn. So the system spent money on him. It spent shipping space on rations. It spent medical research on penicillin. It spent trucks on evacuation. It spent artillery shells to keep him from having to cross open ground. It spent aircraft fuel to smash a roadblock before he reached it. It spent industrial power to preserve the ordinary human being inside the uniform. That did not make the war gentle. It made it efficient. For German officers raised on the ideal of the hardened warrior, this was hard to read correctly. They saw softness because they expected virtue to look like suffering. What they were actually seeing was a military system wealthy enough, organized enough, and ruthless enough to reduce suffering when suffering did not serve the objective. The American soldier did not need to look like a Prussian poster to be dangerous. He only needed to stay supplied long enough for the system around him to keep making decisions. This was the lesson German high command was slowest to absorb. For months, American firepower was dismissed as compensation for poor fighting spirit. American logistics were dismissed as material excess. American casualty evacuation was dismissed as comfort. American informality was dismissed as indiscipline. Then the maps kept moving east. Paris fell.
The German frontier came closer. The reports piled up. The fuel situation worsened. The Luftwaffe vanished from places it was needed most. Panzer divisions existed on paper with too few machines that could move. Infantry divisions held fronts with men too old, too young, or too tired to fill the gaps. And still the Americans came on. Not always elegantly, not always brilliantly, not without mistakes, not without suffering, but continuously. That continuity was what broke the old argument. A German tactical victory could be real and still not matter enough. A machine gun could stop a platoon for an hour. A gun crew could destroy 3 Shermans.
A counterattack could throw Americans out of a village. A roadblock could delay a column. A winter storm could ground aircraft for days. But unless those victories damaged the system behind the Americans, they did not last. The machine corrected itself. The front absorbed the shock. The trucks rerouted. The artillery shifted. The replacements arrived. The pressure resumed. The Ardennes was the great test of that truth. December 1944. Hitler's last major offensive in the West struck through forests, fog, snow, and confusion. It was exactly the kind of operation German doctrine still knew how to execute with deadly skill. Secrecy, speed, deception, infiltration. A weak sector hit hard. American units surprised, split, surrounded, and overrun. For the first days, it seemed possible that the old German way of war had one more violent success left in it. The attack tore a bulge into the Allied line. German armor drove west. American rear units were thrown into confusion. Roads jammed. Rumors spread. Prisoners were taken. Villages changed hands in snow and smoke. This was the moment when an army built on material comfort was supposed to crack. Instead, the system reacted. Patton's Third Army turned from its own front and drove north, pivoting an active force through winter roads with a speed German planners did not believe practical. American units that had been surprised began forming blocking positions. Engineers fought as infantry. Clerks picked up rifles. Artillery groups fired until the snow shook from the trees. Commanders who were supposed to be overwhelmed kept communicating, repositioning, and calling for help. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne and other American units were surrounded. The German demand for surrender came on December 22nd. General Anthony McAuliffe's answer was one word: nuts. That word became famous because it sounded defiant. But the deeper meaning was not the word. It was the system that made defiance possible. For days, bad weather kept aircraft grounded. Bastogne tightened under shelling, cold, hunger, and pressure. Men ran low on ammunition and medical supplies. The situation was real. The danger was real. Then, on December 23rd, the sky opened. Pathfinders marked drop zones. Transport planes came in over the surrounded town. In the first major wave, hundreds of aircraft delivered ammunition, food, medical supplies, and equipment straight into a pocket the Germans believed they had sealed. 3 days later, on December 26th, another massive drop came in. Hundreds more aircraft pushing material into a battlefield that should have been isolated. A surrounded town was being fed from the sky. That was the American logic in its purest form. If the road closed, use the air. If the weather broke, fill the sky before it closes again. If the men are surrounded, do not let surrounded mean abandoned. Then the weather cleared wider, and the fighter-bombers returned. German armored columns that had raced forward under cloud cover now found themselves exposed on roads they did not have the fuel to leave. Vehicles hid under trees. Crews waited for gasoline that never came. Spearheads slowed, then stopped. The German offensive did not end in one clean cinematic duel. It bled out through fuel gauges, broken schedules, jammed roads, air attack, stubborn roadblocks, and American reserves arriving where German plans needed empty space. The war of movement hit the war of production. Production won. By spring 1945, German prisoners behind barbed wire had time to think through what they had witnessed. The contempt was mostly gone. The confusion had become clarity. They had not imagined the American weaknesses. Many were real. American infantry could be tactically clumsy. American units could be noisy, inexperienced, and wasteful. German junior leadership often remained sharper in small unit action. German defenses could still punish mistakes savagely, even in the final months. But the Germans had mistaken those weaknesses for the whole truth. They had judged the visible man and missed the invisible system. The American private with the loose helmet was not the weapon by himself. Behind him stood the factory that made his truck, the refinery that filled it, the shipyard that carried it, the port battalion that unloaded it, the black drivers who hauled the fuel forward through the night, the ordnance crew that replaced his weapons, the medics who evacuated his wounded, the laboratory that made the penicillin, the artillery fire direction center that could turn his radio call into a storm of steel, the kitchen that kept him fed, the mail system that reminded him he still belonged to a country with enough confidence to write back. That was what Germany had truly met. Not just manpower, not just courage, not just machines. A nation-sized mechanism for turning industrial output into battlefield pressure while protecting enough of its soldiers to keep the pressure going. The Wehrmacht had spent generations perfecting the art of defeating armies. It had studied will, maneuver, discipline, command, courage, shock, and tactical genius. But the Americans brought something that did not fit neatly into that tradition. An army that looked undisciplined until the artillery answered in minutes. An army that looked wasteful until the replacements arrived before the attack stopped. An army that looked soft until it kept moving through cold, mud, casualties, ambushes, and counterattacks because the system behind it refused to run dry. That was the real fear, not the man in the foxhole. The certainty that if that man fell, another fed, armed, trained, vaccinated, transported, and supplied American would soon be standing in the same place. Then another. Not because Americans were individually unbreakable, but because the machine behind them was built to keep replacing pressure faster than Germany could remove it. The German army had learned how to kill soldiers. It had not learned how to kill an assembly line that had learned to march.